And I want to now introduce our Sustainable and Regenerative Agriculture panel. This panel will be moderated by Elyse Douglas. Elyse is Senior Scholar at Center for Sustainable Business and will be leading the conversation with and will be introducing our speakers to talk about, again, the return on sustainability investment in sustainable and regenerative agriculture. Thanks so much. Turning it over to you, Elyse.
Terrific. Thanks, Tansi. So I think we have a terrific panel today. I know we're a couple minutes early, but I should start, right?
Yes, giving you more time.
Great. We're going to need it. So we have a terrific panel today. So let me start by introducing our panel. We have Gina Asoudegan, who's the Vice President, Mission and Regenerative Agriculture at Applegate. We have Guillermo Garza, who's Public Affairs, Communication and Sustainability Officer at Arca Continental, which is one of the largest beverage companies in Latin America. We have Donald Pratt with us, Managing Director, McCormick Global Ingredients Limited. And we have Ryan Sirolli, who's the Global Row Crop Sustainability Director at Cargill. So before we get started, I just want everyone to feel free to ask a question in the chat. And if your questions don't get answered, just as a reminder, we've got some workshops to follow where there'll be plenty of opportunity to answer any questions you might have. So I thought we'd get started by hearing first about the different programs that each of the companies are engaged in and what are the specific threats and opportunities that are being addressed. So Gina, if I can start with you. There's a lot of attention being paid today on beef's negative impact on the environment and on human health. So as a meat company, what is the company doing today to address these threats?
Yeah, so we're investing in regenerative agriculture. That is, it's in my title, right? I'm the VP of Mission and Regenerative Agriculture, and I lead our strategy. And how we're, regenerative is not defined right now, but Applegate is defining it this way. We're saying positive environmental outcomes achieved through animal impact. And we think that that's an amazing way for us to reverse that prevailing narrative that meat is bad for the planet and bad for, climate and a big contributor to climate change. In fact, animals are one of the most effective tools for regenerating land by sequestering carbon into the soil, improving biodiversity, improving the water holding capacity of the soil, all good and necessary things. So we like to say it's not the cow, it's the how. Meat is not the problem, but how it's being raised.
So that's amazing. So in addition to working with the farmers to do these regenerative ag farming practices, it has this plethora of benefits in terms of soil health and biodiversity, as well as carbon. So my question for you down the road, not immediately, will be around the benefits. But for now, I just wanted to focus on the fact that climate risk is really what's drawn the attention to the negative implications of cattle. And so my next question is for Guillermo, because the World Wildlife Fund is predicting that due to climate change, 2/3 of the world's population will suffer from water shortages by 2025. So not that far in front of us. And obviously, as a beverage company, water is essential for you. So can you describe your strategies and how you're addressing both within your operations as well as within your supply chain?
Thank you, Elyse, and it's a pleasure to share this panel with all of you. And thank you to NYU for the invitation and the leading work you're doing. Totally right. In recent years, the importance of resilience on supply chains has been paramount, more than evident for every company. The potential company's disruption is very significant, and water risks are at the top of the list. So as a beverage company, water is the core part of the business. Water is our main ingredient, and not only for our products, but as well for the water footprint. So In a nutshell, we established an institutional water platform. So to make this water, risk mitigation and sustainability not as a part of one area only, but a 360 approach. So in that platform, we have 7 interconnected lines of action: efficiency, treatment, and reuse, to use less water in the production, and we are one of the leading companies on that. Source and supply protection, so the vulnerability of the watershed is very important. Regulatory and standards compliance. We want to exceed, regulations internationally and locally. Something that it is very important, replenish to nature. So what we are doing in order to get back to the environment, the water that we use, and we are about 100% of replenished in our operations. But more importantly now is this part of the 7 lines of action is water access. So providing water to the communities near of our operation and the countries that we serve is very important now. We also try to establish multi-stakeholder initiatives to contribute to a better, governance of water. So even if we are perfect as a company, even if we try our best to keep improving, if there is no multi-stakeholder approach on this, we will have the same risk in the future. So that for us is very important to address as a company. And finally, one thing that we have worked with NYU ROSI methodology is water sustainable sourcing. How we are doing the same, not only fences in, but fences out in terms of how we can work together with or sourcing to improve, the way they handle the water footprint. So in a nutshell, that's in general what we're trying to do in Arca Continental.
And can you give us an example of some of the work you're doing around water with your supply chain?
Yeah, we are establishing with them under the Coca-Cola Supplier Guiding Principles to establish the business case in terms of what are the risks in the agriculture raw materials provision for the company. So we try to optimize their water footprint and work in, for example, irrigation efficiency, conservation agriculture, soil management, ecosystem improvement, and social advancement. That's in general what we're trying to establish with them. So they improve their competitiveness, they improve the social, impact, positive social impact in the communities, but also they manage better the water use that, in agriculture is very intensive.
Right. So one of your raw materials is sugar, which is a very thirsty crop, right? So what is there anything in particular that you're focused on with respect to your sugar growers?
Yeah, we in fact are doing a very specific, pilot program with sugar mills and sugar, farmers in order to understand and make a business case and connect it with the business case in terms of what can be the future impacts of this source chain. What are the specific, financial benefits that we can have or we can avoid in the future, and also how we can do a better job for collaborating with them in order to establish and to know a little bit better how these specific external effects like climate change, like change in providers, change in sourcing are affecting this part of our chain.
And Gina, just before we move off what you're doing in terms of the regenerative sourcing, how are you working with your suppliers in terms of promoting that effort?
Yeah, so first of all, we're getting their land verified that it's actually regenerating as a result of animal impact. So we're working with the Savory Institute as soon as we start working with a farmer that's already doing grass-fed and may have been already using regenerative practices, we bring the Savory Institute in to take measurements on the land. And it's a very intensive, process. It's called ecological outcomes verification. So they're testing for increases in biodiversity over time, water holding capacity of the soil, carbon sequestration obviously is the big one. But what we can do then is give the farmers the data that we're receiving on the farm so that we can show them that the practices that they're doing are actually regenerating the land, and then incentivize more of those practices.
And then you're promoting your product as sustainably sourced.
Absolutely. So we, right now, regenerative agriculture and what it is and how it's defined is really not understood by consumers, but we think that that's a great opportunity for Applegate. It's all about building our reputation. We sell to consumers who care about health, who care about the climate, who care about the environment. And we want to demonstrate that we're leading the charge in this area. So, our brand was built 35 years ago. No one knew what antibiotic-free meat was or organic meat. And so we educated people, but then we also drove demand for that type of product, which then incentivized farmers to start growing that way.
That's terrific.
Yes, taking something from niche to norm.
So you build it and they will come, right? Taking a line out of the field of dreams. So Donald, like Applegate, you have a sustainably grown certification, and your products are often sourced from smallholders in remote locations. So can you provide some details on your sustainable sourcing programs and perhaps illustrate how strengthening food systems can positively impact local communities?
Certainly, Elyse. So clearly, food security long-term is a growing problem. Sadly, we have climate change as accelerating the challenges. And frankly, I think putting a damper on how fast we can get to drive that agenda. You mentioned smallholder farmers. There, I think, remain the breadbaskets, especially for a company like McCormick. We've been around for over 130 years now. And so herbs and spices for us is bread and butter to what we do. So McCormick has put forward publicly a commitment, some audacious goals across the enterprise. Two of those, one is to source all our herbs and spices sustainably. And we're starting with the top 5 of our iconics. And we are saying we're doing that by 2025. We've also committed to also increasing the resiliency of about 90% of our smallholder farmers that grow our iconic herbs and spices. So to do this, we leverage 3 impact areas. One is ethical and safe supply chains. So this is, we'll have components like food safety, compliance, and quality attached to that. We also employ regenerative ag systems, which would include components like biodiversity, regenerative agriculture, water conservation. And third, and perhaps most important, is the resilient communities perspective. So that focuses on farmer resilience, women empowerment, as well as gender equality. So let's use vanilla as a good example. It's a beloved spice, still primarily grown in Madagascar. It's only grown by smallholder farmers who yield perhaps, if they're lucky, 10 to 20 kilos individually. And this is after 100% hand pollination before sunrise and a 9-month wait period for the beans to mature. So clearly not an easy product to grow. So how do we help? Well, first, we actually get an independent needs analysis done. In the case of Madagascar, we collaborated with WWF to understand what the current community challenges are, right? The output then of that pointed to things like health, education, income, farm productivity, biodiversity as some of the key challenges that came out of that. That then informed our action plans in collaboration with the communities and a focus on impact, sustainability, and self-sufficiency. The approach is clearly yielding sustainable results that we can measure today. The self-sufficiency component is clearly, I think, or we think, is the what underpins the success. So, for example, to improve farmer income, we removed some of the middleman in the value chain, so the farmer can actually see much more of the profits coming through to them rather than being spread out through middlemen in the supply chain. We also provide farmer support programs to some of the communities to help reduce disease and also improve yields. I mean, a lot of the models, the way they grow today has been done for 50, 60, 100 years. You pretty much put a vine in the ground, then you cross your fingers and hope, you get beans at the end of the day. So we're actually helping to help them with how they can actually increase the yields on the same footprint, while at the same time managing their inputs as well. We also pay for high quality and compliant products, which then gets farmers to actually want to pay attention and get the training and do what they need to do so they can actually increase their income. As an aside, we also work with them not just on the farming side, but also from a resilience standpoint. We work with them to establish things like savings and loan programs, for instance. While we may actually help to set it up, they need to govern it. So we structure it so it's governed by the farm, the co-ops, the villages themselves, so they're accountable to each other then. So the ability to save some money for, albeit school fees or illness, or to help bridge to the next harvest, now that's a real and positive impact to that community. And we're finding productivity goes up as farming communities begin to realize that, hey, instead of focusing on how I can get the next money to pay for this or that, they actually then can focus on the crops, which in turn is what McCormick is after in the first place.
That's great. And like Gina, who's working with the Savory Institute, are you working with any partners in these initiatives?
Yes, we are. We're actually working with a myriad of partners, some governmental, some NGOs. In Madagascar, for instance, we are collaborating. I've mentioned WWF. We also work with CARE quite a bit. We also work with USAID as well. It's scale that I think is the big thing that we're after. But clearly, McCormick can do some work here, but partnership, I think, drives a bigger agenda. It also creates an independent arena for us to actually hold ourselves accountable, right? To walk the talk, so to speak. So the measurements, the auditing, et cetera, usually we employ third parties to help with that. That's great. So collaboration is key. So I want to get Ryan into this discussion here. And, Ryan, Cargill is in a unique position in terms of buying from farmers and selling to downstream companies, including consumer goods companies that all have set, and in many cases, aggressive zero carbon rules. So how has your role in the value chain impacted your investment decisions in regenerative agriculture strategies? And can you talk about your new program, the Regen Connect program?
Sure. And thank you for having us today and for the discussion. Investing in regenerative agriculture has really been a strategic choice for us. Because of where we sit in the value chain, as you mentioned, right? I mean, those relationships that we have with farmers are as important to us as the relationships we have with our customers downstream. Cargill, we largely operate in the commodity supply chain. So if you think of, corn, wheat, soy, canola, sunflowers, things like that, we really see an opportunity to drive this potentially significant impact if you could drive large-scale adoption of regenerative systems, right, in those spaces, just because of the size and scale of those. I think as we think about how do you drive adoption and scale with Regen Ag, there is no, silver bullet, right? There's no one size fits all, right? It requires, I think, a lot of different approaches for how we engage with farmers and how we engage in this space. But I think one area that for us has been particularly beneficial and interesting has been supporting environmental markets, or using, if you think about paying farmers for outcomes such as, today it's very focused on carbon, but I think let's not get caught in just the carbon trap, but also think about what about other outcomes like water resources, potentially habitat or biodiversity in the future. So thinking more about those outcomes that Regen Ag could deliver. I think, markets, especially in the commodity space, if you send clear signals to farmers, they tend to respond, right? When you say, this is what we value and this is what we care about. And so I think this approach is particularly interesting for that group of farmers we're trying to reach. This past year, we stood up a program called Regen Connect, and we'll be really scaling that up, just given the large amount of farmer interest that came into that. And again, this is a program where we're we're paying farmers today for carbon reductions and sequestration as they adopt, soil health management systems, principles, Regen Ag, the underlying principles of Regen Ag on their farms. And then we use those outcomes against our own science-based targets, our own corporate commitments, but then also thinking about how do we leverage that to help our customers downstream meet their own commitments and goals as well, as it ties to those products that they buy from us in that commodity space.
And how would you describe the state of the carbon market today, given that you're now playing a role in it?
Nascent. It's not without challenge, right? I mean, I think it often described as the wild, wild west to some degree, and rightly so, just as we think about it. I think there's a lot. What I'm encouraged about is that there is such interest, right? I think when we look at the receptivity by farmers, by the ag community at large, there's a lot of support and interest in it, which is great. So if we're sending the signals that say there's a value here, we care about it, here's a way to drive adoption, I think that's important. Certainly we need to kind of align around, how are we measuring, things like carbon sequestration? How are we, there's so many different things that we need to talk about, whether it's additionality and permanence and things that were built for, not ag-based systems. So it's not without challenge, but I think there's a real opportunity here if we can continue to think about how do you advance the system and do it in a way that builds receptivity from farmers. Like, are they willing do they see the value in it? Are they willing to participate? Because without them, there is no market if they don't show up. But it needs to enable enough trust and credibility and rigor on the other end that what we're claiming or what we're delivering is meeting the objectives with a degree of trust. So there's a real balance in there that we've got to strike. Right.
And how are you, achieving that measurability in terms of the farmer side? Are you collaborating? How do you measure the farmer benefits?
Yeah. So today, one of our key partners has been a group called Regrow, and where we're using a mix of again, kind of, if you think about the farmer ease and experience of being able to, they're enrolling fields, right? They're not enrolling perhaps their whole farm, but if you think about the ability to select a field, think about their soil conditions, their what they've done historically on that field, understanding the potential impacts if they change things like to reducing or eliminating tillage, or if they're planting a cover crop, or as we start thinking about things like nutrient management, how do those come into play? So helping the farmer understand and assess the potential impacts of the changes on that field, on that farm. But at the same time, then being able to model out what are those impacts. Today, that's carbon related, but what does that also mean for water and water impacts in the future? So I think being able to get to those pieces is really important. Again, finding that right mix between modeling plus sampling, if you think about soil sampling and all the things that go into it. But I think having partners that can help you with both the remote imagery, the farmer experience in this, but then the quantification and outcomes is a critical aspect.
So I want to stick with you, Ryan, and move on to my next topic, which is really kind of understanding how you think about, measure, and the impacts of the benefits of your strategy on Cargill, on the company itself. So clearly, you're paying the farmer for these outcomes, so there's a benefit to the farmer in that regard. The farmer's also getting these incremental benefits in terms of better soil health and water retention from the practices they're adopting. But how do you view the benefits to Cargill? And I know when we did our work with Cargill with the soy supply chain, where we looked at the benefits to farmers, the benefits to Cargill, the benefits to customers, we kind of looked at the benefits across the value chain. So I'm just curious as to whether that work really helped in terms of the development of the program at Cargill.
Yeah, definitely. And I think our work with, in particular, the EVA project that we did was super helpful in terms of, as you start to think about this notion of value, right? Beyond just, we can get so focused on just the cost of a program or laser focused on things like a line item for carbon. But if you start to think about what's the value of meeting your commitments, right? Accelerating, helping us accelerate against our own goals and our own commitments. But also thinking about the value of things. What does it mean for our own employees, right? About talent retention, about bringing new employees on. And we've seen that, right? I think as you actually make progress here and as you actually commit and as you actually invest in this space, more people want to come and be part of your organization. And so I think just as you start to, as one example of, as you start to think about the value of advancing in this space, it goes well beyond just the cost of a program or a single line item, or did we meet it or not, but that bigger picture. I would also say too, it helps us as we start to think about how we engage with our customers. Obviously, on one hand, you think about that we've talked about the farmer aspect of this, that I think is critical. Without them, there is no program. But thinking about our downstream customers and what does that conversation look like and how do we engage? So, I mean, I think as we think about this incredible opportunity that agriculture can hold, if you can drive large scale adoption, right, against climate, against water, against biodiversity opportunities. And I think it helps us as we've thought about the notion of, how does investing in regenerative agriculture at scale help you meet those bigger objectives? And what is the value for you as an organization to meet those? Again, whether it's talent or whether it's how you're engaging with your investor community or things like that. And so I think it really helped us think more holistically and broadly about what are all of the different values and benefits of making these investments and investing in things like regenerative agriculture and of meeting your objectives that are so important for us, in this community. So
that's fantastic. Which it raises a question for you, Gina, in terms of, you mentioned that this regenerative program that you have at Applegate is you're kind of early in the game, right? Consumers aren't necessarily aware that holistic grazing can drive these benefits. So how does Applegate view the benefits of that program? And how do you think about the monetary quantification of those benefits?
We think at the end of the day, that's going to be what builds our brand and brings our brand to a whole new audience of consumers. I mean, young people think the way we do. I mean, they understand that their purchasing power has the most effect, more than even voting, on social and environmental change. So this generation, millennials and younger, they vote with their wallets. So to us, we see, for us to continue in this business, we have to demonstrate that we are aligned with these people's values, which we are. So regenerative agriculture and being able to prove these social and environmental benefits of those systems, I think that's a really great way to make the connection. And something I'm super excited about all of this work in regenerative is the cross-industry collaboration that has developed from it. So in sourcing our meat, we obviously now have hides on these animals that come from a regenerative system. So we sell these hides to Timberland, who's now making their boots with regenerative leather. So this idea that we can bring food and fashion together at the farm level and tap into each other's consumer bases, because if you're a person that cares enough about the environment to buy a pair of Timberland regenerative boots, then you're certainly the kind of person that would be interested in buying the kind of meat that we sell. So I think this is a new world for us, but it's really something I'm very excited about that has just emerged, pardon the pun, organically from this whole system.
And that's got to be beneficial to the farmer as well, because being able to sell the whole cow, right, is a lot more efficient and reduces waste at the farm level.
Absolutely. As prior to this, the farmers that we were working with were not getting a premium for their hides, and now they are receiving that premium. So obviously they were very excited about that collaboration.
And you mentioned your work in antibiotic-free beef, which I think when Applegate started that, again, it wasn't necessarily top of mind for consumers, but over time it became kind of more the norm, right? Mm-hmm. So has there been any learnings from your focus in the past on antibiotic-free that might tell you where the benefits are associated with your new program around verified regenerative sourcing?
Well, we saw how we built our brand by educating consumers in collaboration with nonprofits that were working on the antibiotic issue. So we literally built our brand by word of mouth this way. This was prior to any social media. Right now, we already have celebrities talking about regenerative agriculture that have enormous audiences. What is not out there right now are products that actually, have a verified regenerative seal that they could, make the connection to. So I think we're going to do this the same way, partnering with nonprofits, partnering with influencers, getting the word out. I think the difference now is like the mindset is already there. This younger generation already has that consciousness, already is ripe and ready to purchase from companies that are supporting their values.
That's great. And Donald, again, you have a similar sustainable, you have a sustainable sourcing, labeling. I think is it Grown for Good, or maybe you can talk a little bit about your experience there and how you view the benefits of your certifications. Kind of, are they in line with what Gina's expressing, or do you see additional benefits as well?
No, I think it's in line. Of course, there will be some overlaps and maybe some divergence as well. But I think the core of it is that we think the customer, the consumer, is already there. I think Gina is spot on. We just need to catch up. I think the reality is the sooner we can drive the sustainable portfolio agenda, the sooner I think we can all realize that the loyalty will follow. I mean, consumers are looking for what we can do for them and when we can meet them where they are. So what we're doing is looking at how we can actually drive that agenda, but obviously we're a for-profit company as well. So how do we get that going, assure supply, build a resilient community, and at the same time, manage growth. So, I mean, there are lots of areas. It's more of an end-to-end view for us when we look at sort of the whole the financial and brand benefits around this. So we can talk about the sustainable supply agenda, the superior quality, building resilient community, et cetera. All of these actually not only lower the risk for McCormick or any company, frankly, that's involved in these agenda items, but also will enable that differentiated portfolio, as Gina was alluding to, that then can drive profit and growth as well. So it frankly is a win-win. The effort is worth it, frankly, to be able to do that. Not only you're showing your supply, long-term, but you're also differentiating yourself and building a new community of followers as well for your product line. On the commercial side, I mean, clearly everything you're doing, claimable differentiation is the big banner to wave around that. And of course, the associated benefits that come with that as well. Ultimately, as an industry, regardless of the industry, all our focus has to be to how we can actually continue to drive this. And the measure on impact, as well as the real business benefits that these efforts will drive, I think is the reason to believe. We're seeing that internally with our business. Elyse, we did some work with ROSI. The easy part, obviously, was the sourcing side, the supply chain was already on board. We were easy sells. The big challenge is how do we get our commercial marketing folks on board and the rest of the business. That's the upsell. We've made tremendous inroads in that because people can see the benefits, we can quantify the benefits, and we can open up other avenues to grow share, to increase growth at a faster pace by leveraging a lot of these efforts. So I think a lot in this space. Yes, there's a heavy lifting to be done, but I think the proof will be in the pudding in our ability to be able to measure, quantify, and exploit some of these efforts as well.
Right. So clearly, on the commercial side, the sales impacts are probably pretty obvious to a lot of people. But you also mentioned that the work you're doing drives a higher quality, like vanilla, let's say. And does that create any operating efficiencies within your operations? Any other benefits that outside of just your customers?
It does. It absolutely does. So, well, internally, for instance, I mean, the improved quality and superior quality drives a more efficient production system. So that's clear. Our manufacturing friends thank us for that. On the other side of it, on the product development side, that actually gives them an incremental ability to win briefs, right? So you can think the spectrum opens up when you can actually present them with that sort of variety and that higher quality to be able to get business that perhaps they shied away from before. So it's not only operationally efficient to be able to do that. Think of the risks we lower around quality, right? So first time pass rate, fit for purpose, those sorts of things all drive operational efficiency, which is actually good for business as well.
Mm-hmm. I think you also mentioned when we spoke earlier about it creates more opportunity for flavor development to higher quality bean. So you typically don't think of supply chain with innovation, but very often innovation does come as a result of it.
Absolutely.
So Guillermo, your programs are pretty unique with respect to the focus on water. And obviously you're concerned about long-term accessibility and affordability of your raw materials, be it water, be it sugar. How do you think about the benefits to Arca Continental, and how does applying the ROSI framework help you in terms of understanding those benefits?
Yeah, building on what Donald said, I think we've been using the ROSI methodology, and it gave us a very specific knowledge, technical knowledge, and I'm going to mention that in a bit. But also, I see the benefits in changing the mindset of the company in terms of how to link sustainability and business decisions. So, in the technical part, in an oversimplified explanation, the process that we do with the ROSI methodology help us understand first each ingredient water footprint, water availability in the sourcing regions, current and future, including climate change, etc. Dependency on suppliers, and the volume and price of the purchased materials. So that were the four parts of the equation that help us understand better that chain. The integration of all this information help us to portray a clear business perspective of exposure. So expresses in an expected value the probability of water scarcity and the financial aspect, and the impact on our suppliers have in the environment. And so in other words, it helps us to define lines of actions very specific to the technical side to manage the risk, while contributing to a more sustainable sourcing for Arca Continental. But on the other hand, while this particular initiative was designed to reduce exposure to water risks in the supply chain, and obviously it can be measured in environmental and financial terms, as part of a more comprehensive strategy, the main business benefit is to evolve the decision-making process of the company. Mm. We are evolving how to present sustainability needs, to raise them at the same level as the financial matters. So also our decision-making process and reward system now are including new variables that we are certain that they will unlock competitive advantage, pathways, and creative value in the long term. So this is vital for us because it's a process to change the traditional mindset of splitting sustainability initiatives from business initiatives. And now our goal is that any business initiative should be designed through the sustainability lens. Mm-hmm. And any sustainability initiative should serve the tangible growth of the business. Mm-hmm. So that's in general how we are approaching this. There are some specific learnings about the technical side of the pilot that we are doing with the sugar mills regarding the time horizon. It is different from the other projects. Maybe it would take more. The data is not always available, and we rely on assumptions. Monetization techniques are required to complete the full picture. The calculations are just directional, not the only element to take into consideration for decisions, because there's reputation, there's social aspects that we need to take in account. And there is a need to translate this information into the business language. So to work with the decision makers, understanding and accepting, as Donald mentioned, commercial side of it, financial, legal, to understand how this is not a sustainable approach. This is a business approach. Mm-hmm. So when all this information is gathered and presented to inform the decision-making process, we can anticipate the potential risk, take the necessary actions to mitigate them, but also to this process is equally or even more important and relevant than the result of the initiative. So in this particular pilot, we developed, it was developed by a multifunctional team: environmental, procurement, sustainability, risk, public affairs.
Mhm.
And for some of them, it was the first time they introduced these variables into their processes. So it was a breakthrough by itself. The process, so the technical pilot is one thing. We're making advancement, and we're knowing more and more about how to make a more resilient supply chain. But the process internally, I think that's the main breakthrough. So we have a team more curious and eager to learn this approach.
Mm-hmm.
A team that broke the silo of the inertia and the possibility to find a better way to work the business, integrating the business, environmental and social value while improving the performance. So this is, as you see, all fundamentals elements of the ROSI methodology that help us a lot too in this process.
That's great. So my next set of questions is going to be more focused on kind of an investor focus, but clearly one of the issues for investors is governance. And I know Arca Continental has a very unique governance structure, and you actually have a board level committee. So right up there with the audit committee around human capital and sustainability. Can you talk about how, and I think was put in place several years ago, like 2013. Can you talk at all about how that having that board level focus has changed the way the company operates around sustainability?
Yeah, totally. It's been great to have this commitment at the board level because they understand all the processes of sustainability, not as a do good thing, but as a competitive advantage thing. So the fact that they're seeing all the specific aspect of the standards that we follow, the Dow Jones Sustainability Index results, the Mexican Stock Exchange Green Index results, that gave the company a different approach in terms of seeing the board committed, help us to have all the functional areas committed. So this is, a more strategic approach that we establish, and we define with them what is the materiality of Arca Continental in terms of a combination of the business objectives, the expectation of the stakeholders, the risk assessment, and the social and political reality of each country. So we mix that and we define the materiality, and we establish a commitment at the board level, and then we operationalize that in a specific functional committees. So each area of the organization has a responsibility that it is led by the head of that function, for example, legal or procurement, and they receive a balanced scorecard of the gap analysis that we provide in terms of this is what the market, the investors, and the certifications and the standards are expecting from you, and this is where you are. So let's establish together a continuous improvement program to close the gap and return to the board of directors in terms of we are doing this, and this is the how the function are better, and that's the benefits for the community, the benefits for environment, and the benefits for the business. So that's the loop that we are trying to establish.
Yeah, well, it sounds to me like, given your governance infrastructure and all the work you're doing around risk assessment, and then looking at these long-term strategies and embedding that sustainability, it sounds to me like you're in a good position to deal with what the SEC has just come out with in terms of disclosure requirements. So I do want to focus on investors, and maybe we start, Donald, with you as our other public company on the panel in terms of what are you hearing from investors concerning ESG? has the nature of the questions changed over time, and how relevant is to the overall company's cost of capital and valuation, do you think?
I'll work backwards. It's extremely important and relevant, and I would say increasingly so, frankly. From a ESG standpoint, clearly the S is becoming even more critical to drive, and obviously that's where I think the challenges lie more. But it's not enough, because Guillermo mentioned Dow Jones Sustainability Index and the CDP and a few others as well. We've been reporting, most companies, especially if you're public, have been reporting on those. But the questions, and I think the depth of the questions and the expectations clearly continue to go up. So you can never rest on your laurels with, let's say, getting a decent score last year. This year, they usually reset anyway. But I think the focus, that is, I think, for us, a way for us to see how we're doing and where the gaps may be. We have a bit of similar structure, as Guillermo mentioned as well, where it's top-down driven, and we do the materiality assessments. We look at where the risks are. We put action plans in place, and then we measure them, and people own different components of it, et cetera. But the ESG and the reporting gives us an ability or chance, I think, to continuously reflect and continuously reset or reshape the agenda and the focus areas, all obviously under the lens of the risk, the legal components, the business priorities, et cetera. As far as the latest climate disclosures in the SEC, I think obviously, thankfully, we're in a 60-day period or window right now for questions and comments. But the reality is, we knew it was going to come. So scope 1 and 2 and scope 3 are sort of the buckets that are looked at when we talk about emissions. And 1 and 2, typically, most companies can do a good job with. There's a lot of internal, what are you doing at your business attached to that. But scope 3, where you start looking upstream at what suppliers are doing, that's what drives a lot of the carbon footprint. That's sadly also the more difficult one to manage. But we've been doing some work already in that area. The key is going to be how we actually measure some of this. Clearly, I think with the UN Compact, there's a lot of work already being done around scoping, defining, and putting the right formulas and measures in place. But it's an evolving space. I think the focus for us is right now is let's get going. Let's work through how we're doing the science and the mathematics will catch.
Terrific. So I know we're running out of time here, and I know Gina and Ryan, you're not Ryan, you're not a public company, and Gina, you're a company within a public company. So I guess listening to Donald, it sounds to me like this issue, the focus on carbon, that Cargill is going to play a key role here, especially as that go-between with respect to your Regen Connect program. Would you agree, Ryan?
Yeah. So I think, again, we're a broad business touching a lot of different things in agriculture and food. And so as we think about ways to, in particular, address things like scope 3 for us, which is obviously as an agriculture company or anybody, it's massive. And within the crop space, right, within that area, regenerative agriculture will play an incredibly important role in us meeting our objectives and helping our customers there. And then different strategies in other parts of our business if they're more livestock related or other things, but certainly kind of a critical element for us.
Terrific. And Gina, you were acquired by Hormel, which is a more traditional meat company. What is the role you think Applegate fits in terms of the company's overall strategy and that move toward more regenerative ag, sustainable strategies? And then with just a couple of minutes, and then we'll close.
Well, sure. I think, when we were acquired by Hormel, there was a lot of talk amongst the influencers and consumers that we sell to saying, Applegate is selling out. But it was the exact opposite. It was more that Hormel was buying in. They understand that this is where the market is going, and they needed to be ahead of that market. And so that was the reason for purchasing Applegate. So since the acquisition, my position has been elevated to the senior leadership position. So the mission and the business decisions are inextricably tied together. They're not separated in any way, which is why it seemed odd for us to have a separate impact report. It's like everything we do goes through the lens of our mission, goes through the lens of what we're trying to do for the environment. And we see, I can't speak directly to, from the investor perspective, but I can tell you that the consumers that we sell to want to know where their money sleeps at night. So they need to know where, the retirement fund is being invested in and, what are the values of that company. So there's so much pressure from people, young people especially, to have those questions answered.
Feeling pressure from both the consumer end.
Yeah.
So clearly we've got increased pressure from consumers as well as investors, and that the supply chains are complicated to start with, but we can no longer ignore the exposure for a company within their supply chains. I think we've heard collaboration on all fronts, so collaboration is critical. And lastly, understanding and measuring the benefits of your sustainability strategies will lead to better business decisions and greater profitability. So I want to thank my panelists today, and hopefully we'll get an opportunity to chat again soon.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Allison, are you going to give directions? Yep.
Absolutely. Thank you, Elyse, Gina, Donald, Guillermo, and Ryan for bringing the value chain to life with these examples and insights. Thank you to everyone for your thoughtful questions, seeing a lot of great questions in the chat. You will have the chance to ask specific questions in one of our ROSI workshops beginning at 11 a.m. Eastern. If we don't get to answer your question today, we will follow up after the conference. We'll now take a 15-minute break, but be sure to return to the attendee homepage at 11 a.m. to join one of our ROSI workshops. These small group workshops, led by CSB staff and ROSI clients, will provide an interactive exchange of questions and ideas on how to apply the ROSI frameworks to bridge the gap between sustainability strategies and financial performance. Please click Home at the top menu of your screen to return to the attendee homepage without exiting your browser tab. ROSI workshop options will appear there shortly.